Good evening. Welcome to Sugar and Silk, brought to you in conjunction with Ace Podcast Nation. My name is Ben Doughty.
My name is Michael Silkolajide. But you could have
So,
guessed.
yeah, it was. We kind of set that one up with the intro, really. It's good to have you back, Michael. It has been 2 weeks. It feels like an age since we last, got your erudite insights on this show. Without you, it doesn't really work. The whole concept with no Silk, I've got to say.
Is that erudite? Is that erudite with the ERROR, like erudite? Is it error first?
You see, there's probably some American product or something that relates to, which the UK audience might not understand. But yeah, I mean, regardless,
I missed that one, right?
Yeah. Regardless of that, it wasn't a huge weekend of boxing. We did have the vacant WBC junior. They called it a junior lightweight title fight on one of their websites, which I thought had an old school charm. Usually they say super featherweight these days, but in any case, Ray Vargas lost for the first time, having beaten his previous 36 opponents to Oshaki Foster in San Antonio, Texas. I've got to be honest with you, I only saw highlights, but there was also the show at Wembley last night. Zach Chelly beat Anthony Sims Jr. And there's a kid called Adam Azim I wanted you to have a look at, who a lot of people are raving about. He has the kind of touch of Nassim Hamid, young Nassim Hamid about him. A lot of ability. I know you'd like him. Great boxing IQ. Does a lot of good things. But I believe you couldn't watch that either. So I think you had your own idea about what direction you wanted to go in with the show tonight, Michael.
I really wanted to discuss your book with Mike Ayala that you did, Miguel Ayala, on Tony Ayala. I think that's so interesting, intriguing, and I want to ask you questions, specifically that we're going to get to before we on that. I think that I'm really interested and intrigued in that story. Did we talk about
a copy? Forgive me as I try to orient it because the camera's backwards.
I see it.
This is the copy, right? The first copy. This is how it goes with self-publishing. I always order one copy before I order a bunch of copies because I want to see that they didn't mess it up. I like it. It's kind of thick, as you can see, Michael. I mean, it's 300 pages. The print is quite large, which is one of the reasons why it's 300 pages. But this is a labour of love for me. I know you're aware. I was talking about this before I'd written any books, and I always had this kind of obsession. I've sometimes referred to as a guilty obsession with the Ayala story and mystique.
Yeah, I actually wanted to find out exactly why you chose Tony Ayala for your story.
Well, I just had this fascination, as I say, Michael, since the earliest days. I read about him. I was tuned in from 1980 onwards, certainly reading boxing news and whatnot. But I don't really remember hearing much or reading much about him, even in the British press, until he fell off that mantle with the brutal sexual assault he committed on New Year's Eve 1982. I was more aware of him immediately retrospectively when people were saying that he could have been an era-defining fighter, or he could have been in the loop with the so-called Four Kings. When I say so-called, I don't mean that they're not. I don't mean to deprive him of any majesty, but Hagler, Leonard, Hearns, Duran. And I always remember, so I was 13 when I read about what had happened and how he was going to prison for a very long time.
So before you even go there, though, Sugar, let me ask you, like, you have the Scarface-ish reference on the book cover, right? I mean, I love that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Was that part of his personality? Like, was that, from what you know, from talking to Miguel and just his surroundings and everything, was he Scarface-ish, or did it just seem like his life, his public life, seemed to be that perspective? Like, on the inside, was it like that?
There was no particular intended comparison to Tony Montana, the lead character in Scarface, although you had the drugs, more heroin than cocaine, although he was familiar with cocaine as well, and was said to have been high on cocaine and heroin, along with being under the influence of alcohol on the night.
Wow.
That he committed the most notorious offence. But no, to be honest, I was just looking at cover designs, and that was one option. It threw to me this app that I've got, which it converts photographs in a way that you might find aesthetically pleasing and artistic. And I saw that one. It was when I put the red writing on it that I thought, Scarface. And I said to my thinker, he said, let's do it. I like it. Let's run with it. But but you know, no, I wasn't really comparing him to Tony Montana as such with that.
Okay, so let me ask you, like, Tony Ayala was a legend without beating a legendary name on his resume, right? So what do you think attracted the boxing world to him? And do you think it's the same thing that attracted you to write the story about him?
I think so, yeah. I think Lester Bedford, who promoted most of his comeback fights circa 1999, certainly up until his loss to Yuri Boy Kempas in 2001, he said the only fighter I could compare him to was a young Mike Tyson. He said he was feral, wicked, vicious. He said you just knew when Tony Ayala Jr. got in the ring, you were going to see something dramatic and frenzied. And he said it's hard to explain to people who weren't there watching it play out in real time in San Antonio. But he said that the Spurs, the basketball team, were not that big back then, not as much as they are today. He said, so boxing really was the major sport in San Antonio in the 70s and 80s. And he said that, and the one homegrown fighter that really created that kind of, bear pit excitement was Tony Ayala Jr. He said you knew you were going to see, invariably you're going to see someone get knocked out, and you were going to see a kind of unbridled kind of violence. You know, a lot of people, some of the mystique, and I remember this as a kid. Obviously, the fact he'd done what he did and committed a knife-point rape when he was on top of the world and had already signed to fight David Moore for the WBA junior middleweight title for $750,000, that was incomprehensible and hence fascinating to me.
Well, do you think that was an out? Do you think that was an out for him? Do you think that he thought
he deliberately self-destructed and fucked up?
Yeah,
because he couldn't handle the pressure. Do you know what, Michael? Some people believe that they were raised with a lot of pressure from their, draconian father. They never had a choice to be boxers. Mike Ayala says Mike Ayala loves boxing like you and I do, and he won't miss a fight no matter what it is of any magnitude. And he will talk boxing all day long like we will, and he lives it. But he says he never had a choice to be a boxer. He was being trained from the age of 5 in the front room with his dad's hands for mitts. And he said that it wasn't something they were consulted about or asked if they wanted to be boxers. And what he said at the end of it, we spent a lot of time talking that week I spent in San Antonio, and it was an emotional time. It was kind of like hard, tough therapy sessions to a degree for Mike. I can tell that. And he is an emotional, lovely guy. And he said, you know what? It was quite late one night. We were sitting around the kitchen table, and he said, I figured what it is, the central message. I'm glad I figured it out. He said, Tony didn't want to box. He said, Tony didn't want to box. But some people, including Tony Padilla, who was the old school promoter who promoted most of his early fights before the Duvas got hold of him in the 80s, he said he does these things to get back at his father. When he was getting in trouble beforehand, because it wasn't just the notorious rape on the night of, New Year's Eve 1982 stroke New Year's Day 1983. He was convicted. He was arrested for a very brutal sexual assault when he was 15 years old in the restroom of the Mission Drive-In Theater in San Antonio.
Oh, wow.
When he randomly,
the first time.
Okay, well, he randomly attacked what is described as an 18-year-old co-ed who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah. She may have spurned his drunken advances. Nobody knows. It was Sammy Ayala, Tony Jr., and another friend from the neighborhood. They were watching the movie in the car like you do at a drive-in. I mean, it's more of a kind of an antiquated American thing. We never really had them to be in England, to be honest with you. But they were drinking or whatever. He's 15 years old, already a prodigy in boxing terms. And he went to the restroom, and then when he didn't come back for quite a long time, they went to look for him, and they saw him getting arrested, and sirens and police everywhere, and that's what he did. Now, he was very lucky to get 10 years probation, and he got it 2 reasons. One, because of the golden future he was presumed to have, and because they paid the girl $40,000 by way of restitution, so she didn't pursue a civil case, and she spoke on his behalf in court that she thought he was genuinely sorry and remorseful, and she didn't want a vengeful kind of punitive sentence, and he got 10 years probation. So he was now on to fight.
He was 15 then, or 14? Would you say 15?
He was 15. Wow. It was December 23rd, 1978.
Could he have represented the USA as an amateur? He was a vaunted amateur fighter, wasn't he?
He was. He won 2 consecutive Junior Olympics. He won the National Golden Gloves in 1979, and he beat a huge guy called Lamont Kirkland, who had fought Michael Spinks. Yeah. I don't know if he beat Michael Spinks, but he competed with the likes of Michael Spinks in national finals before that. So the Olympic situation, he was definitely in the upper echelons for that pick, for that berth at 156 pounds. That was the junior middleweight limit in the amateurs. And James Schuler ended up getting the non-existent Olympic place in the end. Ayala withdrew from the race when it became increasingly clear that America weren't going to go to Moscow anyhow. And he didn't get sentenced for the emission driving theatre assault until 1980, before the Olympics. And his attorney, Alan Brown, said he is very much fancied to go to the Olympics, but we don't know how the Olympic Committee will react to his sentencing or his conviction, or this situation and publicity. So they were asking for leniency on that account too, and he got leniency. 10 years probation was very lenient, but he didn't go to the Olympics ultimately because I think they could see which way things were going. And he decided to turn pro in any case in 1980 before the Olympic Games took place.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do remember that. I do remember that slightly. Like, I followed from Canada. I followed some of the amateurs and heard some names batted around. In fact, I think in the back of the magazines they used to have like results of amateur championships and stuff like that.
Do you know what? That's where I first read about Mike Tyson, in the small print pages at the back of Ring Magazine. They were talking about Henry Tillman being the likely representative at heavyweight, but they said Mike Tyson, who was 17 at the time, will still get a chance to topple him in the box office. And they said Tyson is an absolute dynamo, and we hope he achieves that and goes to represents the US in the LA instead of Tillman. But you know how that played out.
Yeah. So let me continue. What made you take up the Ayala story? Like, what was it about? Was it the Ayala dynamic? Was it just this, the fact that he was such a promising talent, and then the bottom dropped out? He was as talented as many fighters are out there, but he's so talented. To see him the bottom just drop out on his career like that was really kind of stunning.
It was, yeah, and I had that fascination with him. But to be honest with you, when I was 13 years old, I was fascinated by the idea he committed the crime that he did, in conjunction with the fact that he'd spat on a fallen opponent. Now, I never saw that footage.
I remember that.
I just read about him spitting on Jose Luis Baltazar when he was on the deck. And I also was fascinated by his claim to have shot up heroin before 3 of his fights. He said, a few times I walked into the ring high on drugs and knocked some guy out. And I just thought it exerted a deep fascination on me for many years. And I wanted to know more about the story.
And did Miguel know this about his brother? I mean, obviously
Mike knew that Tony was into heroin, because he was into heroin himself. Heroin. Tony had started mainlining heroin at the age of 12. Which is pretty dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And Mike knows the guy who he believes gave it to him on the first occasion, and that's one of the reasons why Mike shot this particular fella several years later on Christmas Day, 1977. It would have been Christmas Day, 1977. Mike Ayala shot this fellow professional fighter called Gilbert El Machete Galvan at Woodlawn Lake Park on Christmas Day. This was the Ayalas. Christmas in particular seemed to be a flashpoint for them. The enforced idleness of the holiday season was not good for them. Wow. But Mike, the reason why I shot this fella was because the guy was going round. But I probably shouldn't give too many details of the book away, should I? But the guy I
was going to say don't go too far, but
the guy. I won't say the other reasons, but one of the reasons was because he believes that this guy gave Tony heroin when the kid was only 12, and that was one of Mike's resentments against him.
Yeah. And the father, again, not giving away too many details of the book, but Tony Sr., he seemed to, be that domineering father, the one who's very aggressive and tells the kids what to do and puts the fear of God in them, and he rules by fear instead of by intellect.
Yes.
Did he, when he found this out, because he must have known his sons were on drugs or heroin or cocaine, no?
But he didn't know. This is the interesting thing, Michael. He didn't know because, and I said that, as streetwise as he was in other ways, he knew nothing of the drug scene. Often parents don't. That's the one thing that it's a generational thing. And
I think they don't want to know. I think they know, but they don't want to know. They don't want to realize it.
Yeah, you might look the other way. I've seen that syndrome many times as well, where they're just willfully ignorant and they look the other way.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, heroin is not as radically affecting as it's. I mean, it's a big bad, narcotic drug that you should go nowhere near, and it's filthy and sordid. It's not glamorous and sexy like cocaine, right?
Yeah.
It's heroin has got a bad rap from day. So the thing about heroin, and I'm a former heroin addict myself many years ago. And the thing about it is, it's a lot more functional than people realize. You wouldn't notice. There's lots of people who didn't notice that I was under the influence of smack when I was doing a number of things which I could get away with. You'll see stockbrokers who might be high on heroin who might have shot up in the toilets earlier on, but they can still,
it's a
operate on the
functional
trading
drug.
floor. It's a very functional drug, and you know what? When you get really into it and you get really down the slippery slope, you're more radically affected by its withdrawal than you are by the actual, taking of the drug, because it tends to keep you on an even keel. Mike Ayala certainly said he said he didn't really see it as something to get high on. He said it made him feel normal because he was a very nervous kid, very jittery. He said he found it hard to stand still in one place, a lot of the time, and to relax and to articulate himself. And heroin calmed him down and put everything on a channel that he could function in, and that is quite common. So some of the time, because of the hype around heroin and the reprehensible reputation it has, a lot of people don't realise you could get away with it for people who don't. One of the biggest signs is, it's almost comical I'm saying this wearing shades, is what someone's pinned in their eyes their pupils are dilated and very small. We call it pinned. So I could tell he was pinned, bruv. You know what I mean? So the reason I'm wearing these, by the way, is because they are glasses. Normal glasses, and I broke the other ones the other day, so I can read comments and things like that. I'm wearing these shades not for any other reason, subterfuge, but
okay. We took the circuitous route to that, but
yeah.
I was going to go there.
Yeah.
No, after you wrote this book, and I'm going to read it, and a lot of people are going to read it, and hopefully, I hope it sells worldwide. Do we come closer to understanding the mystery of Tony Ayala?
I think so. I really believe so. It's not, because sometimes you get books which purport to do that in whatever context they've been written, right? And the reader finishes none the wiser, and no conclusions have really been made. I don't believe that's the case in this. I think we have come closer to a human understanding of why the stuff that happened, and that was Mike Ayala was very reluctant to get involved with this, and very apprehensive initially. And said the only reason he did it, and Mike pulled out at least half a dozen times and said to me, "Sorry, I can't do this. I've got to let it die. I've got to let it lie." And then he would come back to me a day or two later, or even an hour or two later, and say, "Listen, man, I'm sorry. I'm with you all the way." But he said, "I didn't want to do this, but you have won me over." And he said, "I've been burned so many times. I just don't think you're going to do that." And I know he knows now that I didn't do that. Mike and I are very close at this point. The relationship is more important than the book.
Yeah.
But he likes it. When I sent him the epilogue and said, "I think I've done it, Mike. I think this is it. And you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've made it." And he called me back and he said, "You wrote a masterpiece." And he said, "And thank you." The important thing to him was it finished on a positive note. You might wonder how that's possible with the recidivist sex offender who died of a heroin overdose in the gym. But the epilogue talks about the contrast between two brothers whose story have been detailed, running parallel to each other throughout the book. And it talks about how one ended tragically with no resolution and never found any peace, and the other one has a wonderful life today and has come out the other side. And that is, in essence,
and they both were under the same pressures, under the same, right?
Yes, absolutely. And if you want to talk about what the cold hard facts that matter, Mike was the best fighter from the Ayala family on record because of what he achieved. And this is me and you often have this debate to a degree. And on ability, you probably would go with Tony on raw ability, but Mike fought better opposition, achieved more. And Mike was definitely the best all round fighter from the Ayala family. That there was something about Tony which just had that wow factor.
Well, people like the bad boy. You know what I mean?
They do.
They do like the bad boy, and I think that's kind of where the romance. That was kind of the romance of the time,
without question. And that's the thing, isn't it? You will always have a fascination. The reason why this book is already done quite well in the first couple of days of release, and it's had a few high chart positions, is because there is that undying fascination with dysfunction and thrills and spills, you know, and crime and destruction.
I mean, we need help with our own lives, so we see other people doing things and pulling through or falling through. You know what I mean? And we kind of like compare ourselves to that, and we're always looking for an answer because the answer is never really given to us. It's like parents don't parent anymore, so we have to find out through other people's ill experiences, in some way measuring up to that. I don't know. It's crazy. Or maybe I'm just speaking for myself.
Well, I'll give you an example, Michael. I remember reading, Joe Calzaghe's autobiography, and with the greatest respect to a fine fighter, and I think Joe Calzaghe is also a very affable, lovely fellow too.
Yes.
But the book doesn't really detail anything other than the fact that I started boxing at a young age. My dad pushed me hard.
Yeah.
And we achieved a lot. I won everything as an amateur, then I won everything as a pro, and then I retired. I had trouble making weight a few times. I had a few injuries. Once I built my Diorolite, which I used to take after the weigh-in, which got me in a bad mood. But all ended well. I beat everybody, and then I retired. Thank you for reading. Good night. And that is all, you know. So it doesn't have 1/20th the kind of interest value of the Tony Ayala story and the Ayala family story. You know what I mean? So we know these things sell, you know, and that's why there's potential for a movie or a documentary or a series. Sylvester Stallone wanted to make the Tony Ayala Jr. story. He made a movie called Lock Up in the late 80s, and some of those scenes were filmed at Rahway Prison in New Jersey, where Ayala was serving his sentence at the time. And he wanted, as a spin-off, having met Ayala, and they spoke, they talked. He wanted to do the film, and supposedly Stallone was offering good money for the rights to that story. But Tony Ayala Jr. apparently refused based on the fact that it would have to end with him in prison. And he said, I'd rather be forgotten than be remembered like that. So he didn't, supposedly he vetoed that idea.
So he had pride in, well, I guess when his desires kind of like came to the forefront, his pride or his how he wanted to be seen took a backseat, which obviously happens with addictions. You forget about what's really important and you just decide on fulfilling the urge you're feeling right now, right?
Yeah. The thing with Tony as well, because an important character in the story is his therapist, who he met in Trenton prison for the first leg of his sentence. The director of psychology and psychiatry at Trenton prison was a guy called Brian Raditz, who they established a bond, and he got through, and he supposedly uncovered the abuse that Tony Ayala Jr. had suffered as a youngster. He opened up to him and he confessed that to him. And they concluded, see, Mike thinks they built a narrative. Mike doesn't believe it all. Mike says Tony was abused, but he knows who did it. And we reveal who it was in a book. We say who it was as far as Mike.
Wow.
You know, Mike, I'm not going to, there's no way.
No. I want to read. I want to read it. I don't want to hear it.
Okay, yeah. So, but the point being, just quickly, what Ayala said to a journalist about this whole thing, he said, rape is about anger and violence, right? He said, I wanted to be loved. I didn't think I was capable of being loved. I didn't believe that. He said, I thought I'd tricked my wife into marrying me. He wasn't actually married to her, by the way, but they were effectively married. Lisa Pyers, who was absolutely gorgeous, incidentally. But he said, I didn't believe that she loved me. I thought I tricked her. He said, and I wanted to be loved by someone who didn't know me, who didn't know I was a boxer and didn't know I had money. That's what he blamed the attack in 1982/1983 on, because he said, I know it's crazy, but that's the way I was feeling. So that was his version of events.
Did Tony have any kids?
No.
Wow.
He didn't.
But Mike Ayala does.
He has 2 daughters and 1 son. Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful. And none of them are fighters.
No, they're not. You know, his son Santino wanted to be a fighter, and because he got it was called anaplastic large cell lymphoma at a certain age, which left him less able to pursue a ring career, amateur career even. So Mike vetoed it on those grounds because he thought he didn't have a clean bill of health for it, and apparently he said his son had a resentment for that because he thought his dad was stopping him from boxing, with the irony of that, you know, in the Ayala family. But Mike was saying no. I think Mike asked the local commission not to card him because he said he shouldn't be boxing because he's had this, you know, this condition, and it's not safe for him to box. So Mike felt quite strongly about that, you know. But that caused a rift between him and Santino at the time because the kid actually wanted to box. You know, that was a strange scenario.
Yeah. Is Tony Senior still alive today?
No, he passed away in 2014. You know, Tony Jr. was still in prison when he passed away, but he was allowed out for the funeral. Okay. But he had to go back in for another 9 days after that. And Mike was always
9
like,
days.
ridiculous. Mike was like, why couldn't they just let him go? But they returned him back to Texas State Prison for another 9 days after he attended his father's funeral.
Wow. So he did part of his sentence in Rahway and then did another sentence in.
It went like this. He was at from 1983 to 87. He was at Trenton. He was at Rahway from 1987 to 1993. And from 1993 to 1999, he served the rest of it in Bayside Prison in Leesburg, New Jersey.
Okay. Is the mom still alive?
The mother, Pauline, died last. It was February 2021 last year. Sorry, 2022 last year.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. That would have been. And did you get a chance? No, you didn't get a chance to speak to her, obviously.
I didn't get a chance to speak to her. No, I mean, Mike told me she sounded like a really colourful character. There's a few pictures of her as a young woman in the book, and she looks absolutely beautiful, stunning.
Yeah.
And in her later, she sounded very kind of colourful and opinionated. Mike said she was quite a handful in later years. He was absolutely privileged to get to spend the last few years of his life looking after his mother with his wife Laura. But she sounded like a handful and someone who was, you always knew she was there. So, it was just they were an interesting family, you know. I mean, I would like to have met the dad, who no doubt, regardless of the story with his own sons and how people might feel about that, and he certainly later acknowledged he'd been too hard with his sons. He said, I pushed them too hard, and I think he said I would have done it differently today when he looked at how certain things turned out. But as a boxing man in San Antonio, he was a colossus. You know, he made a massive contribution. He trained a bunch of amateur champions, and also in the pros he developed 4 world champions in Gabby Canizales, Jesse Benavidez, Maribel Zurita, and John Michael Johnson. You know, they were all. So he had a big body of work as a coach in San Antonio, and was just a major boxing figure.
Yeah. I distinctly remember, just to jump back to a second on Tony and earlier in his career, I distinctly remember the first time I saw him, I think it was on NBC Sports World.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was Robbie Epps. It was somebody else before him. But I remember him getting in the ring, and I looked at him and I was like, this guy's junior middleweight and he's chubby like that. Like my mind couldn't get around it, because every single fighter that I saw that wasn't a heavyweight, you see Buster Mathis, you see these other guys, and but when you see a professional boxer that's not a heavyweight and he doesn't have abs and he is ripped, and you know what I mean, you're like, what even? Why? This doesn't even make sense. Yeah, why?
Can you believe? Okay, you said he looked kind of chubby and fleshy at junior middleweight, right?
Yeah.
Can you believe he won his first national title at 16, the Golden Gloves middleweight, which is 165 back in those days, right?
Yeah.
Well, it was 165, so weight was always a bone of contention between him and his dad, in dedication and road work and all the rest of it, and diet. So he looked to me like he could have made a good welterweight.
Yeah, exactly. So it's more or less like you have to say it's discipline. He didn't like being disciplined, and maybe his dad kind of felt like he couldn't discipline him any more than he did, or have a level of expectancy more than he had.
When you're not boxing above your natural weight division, let's say, and you're drinking and shooting heroin, sometimes before fights as well, you must have a lot of talent to walk through those junior middleweights that you did and become the WBA number 1 contender when you're not really bringing your A+ game, Yeah.
Well, let's look at this for a second. Well, I'm talking about the A+ game. Well, quite possibly he's even more fearless, because that, I don't know if the drug kind of kills any apprehension or.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a big help.
Yeah. No doubt it is. Don't get me wrong. He wouldn't have been high in all of those fights by any stretch. He says there are 3 fights that he shot up before expressly, and they were, for any Ayala obsessives, they were Nicanor Camacho, Dario de Asa,
and leave off the last one for the book.
Yeah, I'll leave that off the book. There were 3 fights. There was 3 fights. He says see, there was one fight when they both topped the bill in San Antonio back in I believe it was in 1981. Mike and Tony were double headers in San Antonio.
Yeah.
And they were staying at the house, which was at this point on St. Louis Avenue. Sorry, it was Royston Avenue on the south side of San Antonio. And they were waiting. They got a limo to go to the fights. It was quite a big deal at home. The 2 brothers topping the bill. Mike had only recently started talking to his father again after a period of estrangement, which was quite constant with those 2. And he said they were waiting to go to the fights. And he said Tony was taking forever in the bathroom. He said Tony just wouldn't come out the bathroom. It's like, what the hell are you doing in there? And Mike said, I knew what was going on. He said, but it wasn't my place to say it. So he just and he said, and then when Tony finally came out, he said, my father was upset, but he didn't say anything to him. Nobody questioned him. And he said, because Tony was the golden child. But he said, I would have called hell. I would have caught hell for doing that and for taking that long when we were getting ready to go to the fights that night. But he said Tony was a golden child, and that was that. And that was the night that he fought Nicanor Camacho, looked substandard, blamed it on flu or a virus or whatever. And he later admitted he shot up at home the night before the fight. The night of the fight.
So, let me get this straight, because I'm not very knowledgeable on drug culture and what have you. But the heroin's the one where you tie the rubber thing around your arm and you put the needle in. You
got the idea. You watched Sid and Nancy, didn't you?
I watched Beretta. I think it was. Was it Beretta?
Yeah. I mean, heroin. That what you've just described there is the process when you inject any drug intravenously, but heroin is the one most commonly administered in that way. Street drugs, And I mean, but you can smoke heroin as well. You can. They call it chasing the dragon, right? You put it on silver foil, bake-off foil, and you put a lighter underneath it. I can't believe we're doing a how-to guide here with Class A drugs still. You see what level we've stooped to. This is what we've become. This is what your career has become about. People how to take drugs. You chase it. That's one way. When people smoke heroin, okay, they chase the dragon, as it were. Mm-hmm. But most people who, I guess, most hardcore addicts start mainlining it. They start banging it up, as they say, because it's a lot more effective and efficient. They don't lose any of it, and the high is more intense. And
that's the one, cooking it on the spoon and syringe.
That's
cooking on the spoon. Wow. Okay. I mean, I hear obviously nothing pretty from those stories, and the fact that he was able to continue fighting through that is, if that energy could have really been like brought to I don't know. I would love to have seen his potential like really unfold, and that takes me to the point. Okay, so he was set to fight Davey Moore for the world title, right? Like they had the date and the time and everything. And then then all of a sudden he got, they came in, they got him. He was in training when they got him.
He wasn't in training. He was arrested on the night. It was, like I say, he'd been out late with Lisa. They'd gone to a party on a barge.
You said on the night, meaning on the night, not the night of the fight.
No, on the night of the rape.
Yeah, the night of the rape. Okay.
He was arrested in the small hours of the morning, walking shirtless and shoeless in the apartment complex where he lived and where the victim lived, literally across the way. Yeah. But, the Davey Moore fight was set for May, I believe. I don't believe there was a date. It was just for some weekend in May. He'd already signed the contract. I know that much. Mm-hmm. And he was going to have a tune-up as well in, I believe it was January. He was looking at a tune-up against a guy called Leslie Sweet Lemonade Gardner. There's a nickname for you. There's an alias. He was a Kronk fighter, I believe. He was from Detroit in any case. And if you're from Detroit, then you've got to come out the Kronk, right? So he was, Leslie Sweet Lemonade Gardner was supposed to be his tune-up just to stay busy. Obviously, that didn't happen once he got arrested. He was on bail for a little while, but then once he got convicted in April 21st, 1983, he was then, remanded at Passaic County Jail until he was sentenced on June the 21st. And June the 13th, just to be absolutely correct. And And that was that, then obviously he didn't see the light of day then for 16 years. But the interesting thing to me as well is that he came out to a hero's welcome, and he signed a deal that was worth 400 grand as soon as he came out, for the next 4 comeback fights. And people tell me, Mike tells me he pretty much got $250,000 up front for this deal.
Yeah.
Lester Bedford might be watching this and he might say it wasn't that way, but he certainly earned 200 grand for his first comeback fight against an relatively undemanding opponent for his first start in 16 years. Yeah. So what I'm saying, Michael, is he was still a big deal. He came back to a very emotional hero's welcome in the Freeman Coliseum that night, and he was getting 6-figure sums. He said, this might sound arrogant. After the first fight, he said, this might sound arrogant, but I'm not going to fight for 20 grand. I'm a 6-figure fighter. I'm creating interest. I'm attracting people. And it was true. And I said to Mike, and I can't think of another boxer in history, Michael, who could have gone away for that long, 16 years, for such a reprehensible reason and come out to those kind of opportunities and that kind of money. I think it's unique in boxing history, that story. Yeah. And when I asked Mike what he thinks it was, he said the city was in love with him. It was just the way it was.
Well, everybody was talking. Tony Ayala was the conversation, and he was the conversation at junior middleweight and middleweight. If there was going to be a fight, when Tony Ayala was rated, when he was in the top 10 of the world, if you talked about the champion in either junior middleweight or middleweight, when Hagler was champ, it was like, what would he do against Hagler, and what would he do against Sugar Ray, and what about Tommy Hearns? And everything was about Ayala being the up and coming. Now I knew Mugabe was around at that time too. And
but thinking, Michael, you could have fought him. Maybe if he'd have played out his natural trajectory, you might have fought him.
Yeah,
that's entirely plausible. He could have won a junior middleweight title, or could have even unified. But I don't know. Then after that, looking to launch himself in the middleweight division with Hagler in mind, he could have fought you. But that is a very plausible timeline.
Yeah, I didn't really get to the scene till it was very short, like 86 and 87. Yeah, and obviously, well, what do you think? What would have happened with Tony Ayala? Let's say he fights Davey Moore. What in your mind happens in that fight, and where does he go from there?
I think he stops Davey Moore. I will give it in a similar time frame to that Duran stopped him, around 7-8 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
But I suspect he would have messed up at some point anyway. I think he would have been one of those kind of Comet type.
Mm-hmm.
Situation,
he wasn't going to be around for long.
A shooting star, But supposedly he did have a different temperament and didn't have the demons that he had. And when I say demons, he definitely had demons. I'm not trying to be a bleeding heart, and I'm not trying to excuse his crimes and misdemeanors. I'm not trying to say, it was all about I'm not trying to overlook the victim or anything like that. But he had demons. He was a tortured soul. That's just seems beyond argument to me, having researched the situation very deeply. But had he not been that way, but see, this is the thing, Michael. This is the confession, all right. And I've admitted this to Mike. I don't believe he'd have beaten Sugar Ray Leonard or Tommy Hearns or Roberto Duran, and I certainly wouldn't have been optimistic against his chance of Marvin Hagler. I think he'd have beat a whole lot of junior middleweights and middleweights, but I don't see the evidence to suggest. See, Lou Duva said. He talked about Hagler, Duran, Hearns, and Leonard, and he said he'd have walked through all of them. He said, that is hyperbolic. Come on, man. That is hyperbolic, And he said, forget about Muhammad Ali even. But you'll love this one. He said Rocky Marciano and Tony Ayala Jr. Nobody quite had it like they did. That was Duva's kind of overweight Italian perspective on it, on the whole situation, But no, I don't think Ayala would have. Could he have been an all-time great? Sure, maybe. So Mike McCallum is an all-time great, yes. Yeah. And I don't think Mike McCallum would have beat most of those Fab Four either. I think he could have beat Duran, a junior middleweight. But
that's actually a good question, because I'm not I'm sure it's Muhammad Ali then Sugar Ray Leonard for me, but.
They're your two favorite fighters ever, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Same.
Yeah, you too? All right.
Of course, without question. No, and when I was arguing for Robinson over Ali in the historical pound for pound debate, it doesn't mean that my affection is much more. That's why I allowed you to win that argument, because I didn't have enough resistance. I thought I came into the fight feeling confident, but when I got there, my heart wasn't in it. That's why you won. The only reason.
Listen. We can the judges' scorecards are the judges' scorecards. I can't argue. You know what I mean? They said they gave me the KO. I think in KO in 4. I know you're arguing the fight shouldn't have been stopped, but the results are the results, man. I can't do anything about that. I'm sorry.
I could have continued, but I just wanted to see you, have your moment in the sun. But
You
anyway,
you pulled a no mas. You know?
yeah.
So let's say Tony beats Davey Moore, and I think that, listen, I can't take anything away from Davey Moore. He has heart, and he is going to get off. He didn't really get off against Duran because that was just savagery, and Duran is such an intrinsic, he's his instincts and his abilities, like on that night. I don't know.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, that was just an incredible performance.
That was the resurrection of Roberto Duran, and that is one of my favorite performances to watch. When you talk about one-sided beatdowns, masterful, it was poetic, the savagery of that fight.
That was so savage. I mean, I couldn't even imagine what Davey Moore was experiencing at that time. He comes in there, he's in New York, he's in his he's in his backyard, and his front yard, and he's thinking, yeah, this is all for me, and this is going to be my crowning glory. I'm going to come in, I'm going to whoop this old man who is really a lightweight, and I'm going to come in and do Sugar Ray on him like he never experienced Sugar Ray before and all that. And from the opening bell, boy, and every time he got hit, when you get hit,
exploded.
You know what happens when you get hit? Everything gets distorted. Sound gets distorted. You know what I mean? It's like a nightmare. It's like you see these demons screaming at you and all, and you hear these things that aren't normal. Like you just can't make sense of it. But to the level he was getting hit and the pain he was feeling, like there comes a time, like after the adrenaline wears off, you start feeling distinct pain. And it's just the way it is. You know what I mean? The adrenaline doesn't stay with you from round 1 to round 15. At some point, the adrenaline goes, I'm empty. And so that's what decides when a fighter quits or doesn't. When, you know what I mean? When you really feel it's unblanketed pain, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
And then you find out a guy's pain threshold. I thought it was incredible, the pain threshold of Davey Moore, because he was getting hit with incredible body shots, and body shots are the most painful shots to get hit with.
Yeah.
He got thumbed in the eye, but trust me, I know that one very well.
You talk with authority at this point. No,
it's like someone took a thumb and pushed it to the back of your brain. It's just like the pain is just like on another level. And then you still have to fight, and then your mouth is bleeding, and the crowd's going crazy. And there's this guy in front of you that's just looking at you like he's gonna like just really cannibalize you. So that to me was just like, Duran, he landed again, and he landed with authority.
And Duran was a 3-1 underdog then going into the fight that night. And based on pretty sound reasoning to an extent, because he'd lost to Benitez. He was thought to be on the back nine, as to quote a rather eccentric
but Davey Moore only had 11 fights as well, and he'd beaten who do you have, the silver assassin, Charlie Weir from South Africa for the title. He beat
he defended against him. He beat Takeo Murata. He was a Japanese guy. He beat the Japanese guy in Tokyo. He got the opportunity, and he took it with both hands. But I do remember there was some fearless forecaster type guy who was well known in American press circles, and he said, Duran is not going to beat Moore. I only wish I was as sure about going to heaven, or something like that, he said, which resonated after the event. But
I wonder where he is now.
I think that version of Duran and Ayala would have had a fight for the ages.
Yeah,
I think if those two had met, because as I say, he was supposed to meet Duran on November 20th, 1982. Yeah. Then he got arrested in August for breaking into a neighbor's house in San Antonio and doing some kind of damage, ransacking the place. Some press reports have described. He said he was so drunk he thought he was in his own house. I don't know. It wasn't a woman's house, as has often been reported. It was a man called Jim Carpentier whose house he went into for whatever reason. The guy didn't press charges. In the end, he declined to press charges. Some people think he was threatened, but he says he just sympathised with the plight of the man who stumbled into his house drunk. He understood those kind of problems, he said, and no hard feelings. Yeah. But that put the Duran fight in question on November 20th, 1982. From there, while Tony was in rehab. He was ordered to go to rehab for a month in Orange, California, as part of his, they deferred sentence and told him to go to rehab. And then in the meantime, Duran lost to Kirkland Lang in a bit of a sensation at Detroit's Cobalt Hall, which left the fight dead in the water. Consequently, Ayala fought Carlos Herrera in a WBA final eliminator on November 20th, the day after he was supposed to fight Duran. And then, the rest. He beat Herrera, flattened him in 3 rounds. And then after that, New Year's Eve, and there you go. Youth, goodbye. Career, goodbye.
Yeah. So at that point, he was still with his father, and he was still with Duva at that time. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Duva was never involved in the second career, but he was on board all the way. I mean, so I guess Duva's cutoff point was the arrest for the West Patterson assault and the subsequent conviction and sentencing.
So thinking about it, there must have been other writings on the wall for Duva with Tony that haven't been brought out. Like they're probably, I'm sure there must have been happenings or circumstances or bad things.
Problem, yeah. He said Duva said he eventually got tired of all that, the trouble he would get into, because he was always getting into trouble motoring related offences. He'd driven since he was a kid, and he didn't have the greatest respect for accepted standards of motoring decorum, and road safety and all the rest of it. So that was always an issue. But, journalists have said to me, like John Whistler, who's probably the most prolific journalist on Ayala, who covered boxing for the San Antonio Express News for many years. He said the justice system in San Antonio just looked the other way because he was a prodigy, And he had a kind of different passport to a lot of ordinary people for a long time, So the kind of timeline of events in terms of his criminal history is the 1978 driving assault. Then after that you had the burglary of the neighbor's house in San Antonio, a whole bunch of driving things. By the time he got out, he got shot in the shoulder in 2001 December, because after he lost to Campas, he broke into another apartment with women in it, and one of them shot him in the shoulder. I explained the situation more fully in the book, obviously, but that was another thing, and he only got probation for that because he managed to. It was he was defended pretty well in that case, and it was managed. He knew the woman, the young lady who was 18, who was a lodger in this particular apartment in San Antonio, and they knew each other from the gym. They'd been out to dinner before. He bought her a dress. They managed to prove a certain degree of familiarity between the two of them. And as far as he was concerned, he was invited to the house at 4 in the morning. Wow. They say no, he walked in and he came in uninvited and blah blah blah. But he got shot in any case. No, none of the women were harmed, and the only person who was hurt in that particular case was Tony Ayala. But the point is, he just couldn't stay out of trouble. I mean, if I were him in the situation he was in, I don't think I'd ever enter another woman's apartment uninvited again for the rest of my life. Knowing he had second chances and golden opportunities, even after the stigma of that, So well, he couldn't stay out of trouble was the bottom line, whatever it was.
One of the saddest things I ever saw, because I'm not as attached to Tony's story as you are. Obviously, you know a lot of things about it that I don't, that I'm going to find out in the book. But one of the saddest things I remember, only because, again, I wasn't familiar with Tony Ayala's whole story and the other mishaps he had, was his loss to Yuri Boy Campus.
Yeah.
I mean, I was cheering for him. Obviously, I didn't feel the pain of his victims. That wasn't my thing at that time. I just knew he was a fight story, and I admired him. I liked him as a fighter. I looked at him fight, and I thought he had incredible ability. A little chubby, but you know what I mean. Still, he was an amazing fighter, and so I admired that ferocious, like. He had that instinct that certain fighters had, and some of them looked it, and some of them were it. You know what I mean? Like Sugar Ray had that same kind of killer instinct when he got you hurt. He'll walk through fire to get you out the ring. I always admired that, and he had that.
And Sugar Ray was abused too.
Exactly. Yes. So I guess with that kind of fuel, the kind of fuel is really helpful. But I guess I'm glad I wasn't a good finisher.
Yeah, yeah, me too.
I'd rather not be a good finisher
If
if
that's
I have
what
to
it
go
takes,
through that.
if it comes at that price, yeah,
Hey, come on, we'll go the distance. I'll take it easy this round.
yeah. Willie,
Um, yeah, so that when I saw him fight Yuri Boy Campus, that was one of the sad, that to me, that was, I remember I was very sad with Ali and Holmes, and I was very sad with Camacho and Leonard.
yes, same.
And with this one here, that kind of like, it did weird things to me. I know he was away for a long period of time, but just see him when he came back, that's the first time I had seen him, and I'm looking at it, and he wasn't doing anything like Tony Ayala, and he was just, and Yuri Boy Campus, he had lost to many fighters by
He'd
that
lost
time.
to Obakar, Felix
Yeah,
Trinidad, yeah,
yeah, and also De La Hoya as well, right?
Fernando Vargas.
Yeah, Fernando
Oh,
Vargas. Yeah, a lot of guys. So
yeah.
that really, I remember that left a real bitter taste in my mouth.
Well,
And
what you see then when his father pulls him out at the end of the 8th round, he starts sobbing uncontrollably. You know, he really is. You know, wails of anguish coming from the Ayala corner.
yeah.
You know, hugs him in them tree trunk arms and says it's okay. And you can hear Tony Ayala Jr. say, "I'm sorry," and his dad says, "Sorry for what? Don't worry about it. You know, it is what it is." But he'd not lost since he was 8 years old. You know, he had not. He's credited with 140 amateur fights,
Yeah.
of which he won 132, and he hadn't lost. So those 8 losses were all in the Pee-wee
Wow.
stages. You know, when
Yeah.
he'd never lost when his age was recorded in double digits at all. So he didn't know what it felt like. And I think if he'd have won that fight, his next fight was going to be something really big. They were hoping to get it on HBO because it was on ESPN2. That fight, that was the first time he got national television exposure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in the Campos fight in his comeback, and
Yeah.
you know. This was the master plan, and it was going to be a Rocky Balboa-esque comeback and then some, you know.
Yeah.
And it was starting to look real. But obviously Campos, you know, spoiled the party. I don't think that was the smartest of matches they could have made, thinking about it, you know. But that was his whole world, and his whole world really did collapse like a castle built on sand after that. You know, it was after that, a few months later, he was arrested in the apartment when he got shot in the shoulder. And there was as Lester Bedford said at the time, he said, "I think the feel-good part of this story is over," he said after that particular incident, you know.
Yeah. You don't say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. That's an exciting story. I'm really looking forward to reading the book, and thank you so much for like getting it done, from writing it and getting it done with Mike Ayala, which is,
Yeah.
you know,
And I can't thank Mike Ayala enough
that's
for
the truth.
this is the thing, right, Silk? He was so committed because he was very evasive at first.
Mhm.
When I would message him, he'd come back to me politely and we talked for it. Then he'd go silent for months actually.
Mhm.
But once we bonded, and that was that. Because I said, "Listen, any chance we could talk about this again?" We talked about it a few months ago, and he said, "Sure." We had a video call on Facebook while he was driving, you know, doing his work as an air conditioning tech, you know, going to the next job. And he's on the freeway and we're talking, and we had a reasonable conversation for about half an hour, and then I said to him, "Okay, we're going to give this a go, right?" And I said, "Can you commit to 2 phone calls a week, 2 hours a week?" And he went, "Yeah, sure." And I thought, does he really mean that though? Because people say stuff all the time. I thought, am I going to have to be chasing him? He was so damn committed. I couldn't get rid of Mike. He would be messaging me because obviously we liked each other, and then you know, he would message me saying, "Hey, what's going on? Are we talking today?" And it's like, well, we're not really supposed to be talking till Wednesday, but you know, because I had stuff I wanted to write and offload. I had all this stuff on tape, and I wanted to transcribe some of it before I got more stuff in my head. You know, so I had a pace in mind. He'd be like, "Are we talking today?" And I'd be like, "Well, if you want to talk today, we can talk." And in the end, we were just talking all the time. And he'd call me when it was 5 a.m. where he was, and he'd say, "Hey, I just got another piece of the puzzle. I just remembered something." And, you know, to go from that when we started in August to this, sorry, I'm still getting used to the bloody camera. That is there forever now. That is there for posterity. It is not slim volume. That will live forever, and it's in a. It's all collected in one place: the good, the bad, the ugly, and it's with an overall sensitivity that Mike can live with, and that he actually likes, you know. And he told me a friend of his wife's read it this week and said she was blaming his wife, saying, I didn't get to sleep till 1 a.m. and I was late for work, and it's your fault because I was reading that damn book. I couldn't sleep. And that is fantastic to me, because he said she's not a sports fan, she's not a boxing fan. And I know Mike was really worried about people in his locale and in his peer group reading it. He would say to me some nights, do you know, he said, if I don't play this right, I could lose everything I have. I could really mess this up, And I'm so glad that he likes the result, and he's happy with it, and he feels it was a worthwhile project, because as I say, he was so committed, and I couldn't have done it without him. And he was just like a surgeon on it until we got to the end. You know what I mean? He was never out of commission. He was available to be taught, anytime, day or night. And we went.
Last question before I know we got to kick off soon, but last question: What did telling the Ayala story do for you?
It's weird. I feel this big sense of achievement, much more than the other books. I've done 4 books before this. It was cool to be Benitez's first biographer, and that one's done well, and I've had good feedback from it. And I look back on it and flick through it sometimes, and I think, that wasn't a bad job. But this feels like something like I had this thing about being the first person to author an Ayala project, whether it was a movie, a script, or a book, a biography. And now I've done it, and I was talking about this in 2009. One of my best friends in life and on social media, John Doyle, we first started talking over that. He had a scrapbook, an Ayala scrapbook, and he was sending me stuff because he knew I was interested in the book. This was 2009, and he was emailing me stuff, and we said, it'd be good to get it. And I always said the title would be El Torito, which is, I guess that was kind of a brainer. So I feel a big sense of closure myself. For Mike, it's a different kind of closure, because he was emotionally attached to it, and there's also a lot of trauma and a lot of sadness and regret. No story. That's why he said sometimes he needed to let it die, and he just couldn't do it. And I think that was an acid test for me and him, for the friendship between us, because I said, "Listen, that's fine, Mike." Straight away, I said, "Don't worry. That if you don't want to do it, we abandon it right now." And then he said, "Okay, thanks, man. I really appreciate that." Then the next day he said, "Listen, let's give it another go." And I constantly say to him, "Mike, I promise you will never lose control of this project. I will never suddenly break away and be like, okay, I've got what I need now. And anything you don't want in there gets changed. And if you want to withdraw it, anything," I said, "I'm perfectly prepared to waste a year of my life on this, only for you to change your mind. I'm ready for that." And I think, and I meant it. So I think that was enough for him. And then, I'm just it's been such a fantastic journey, honestly. And to go and stay with him for a week in San Antonio was wonderful as well, and to train with him. So I do feel really good about it, to be honest with you. Regardless of how well the book does, it's been my favorite literary project so far.
And can you relate any of your experiences to Tony's and Mike's?
Well, the heroin. I mean, that's one thing that I think me and Mike bonded over, was the fact we've obviously both done heroin. We both walked on the wrong side of the tracks and both been arrested and got up to skullduggery and all the rest of it. I can't sympathise with I can't empathise with the pushy father, because I said my mum hated boxing, didn't want me to box. My stepfather wasn't overly fond of me a lot of the time, and didn't like boxing either. So that was a double whammy. And I actually said to Mike, you know what? I think I'd have loved a father like Tony Ayala Jr. Like Tony Ayala Sr. I'd have loved a father like that. Yeah. Mike said, my father would love to have trained you. That was kind of cool and surreal. But I imagine, by the way, in the reality, you probably wouldn't feel that way when you've got that kind of pushy patriarch figure. It probably isn't as much fun as I'd have thought it was. But no, I mean, I think that was the thing. That was the thing for Mike as well. He said to me, "Did you box?" And I said, "I had a few amateur fights, yeah." And I said, "If you're curious, I have a little bit of footage." And when I showed him some clips of the fight I had in New York at Gleason's, he said he liked, he was impressed. He said, "I'm being very honest." He said, "But you're a good technical boxer." So I think it was important to him. He wasn't just talking to some journalist, Johnny come lately figure who had to a degree. And the fact that I knew what it was like to get strung out on heroin was a bonus, I guess.
Yeah. When you have common ground, it always helps make that bind stronger.
Yeah.
And Yeah, that's a miraculous. It's an incredible story, and I'm looking forward to you doing. Okay, so your next one. Can I pick somebody who you should do next?
You go ahead. I'm looking for for suggestions. Go.
Matthew Saad Muhammad.
No, I can't do that because Trish Dixon, former editor of Boxing News, has just done it. Literally, he's literally just put a book out last.
No way.
Honestly, you should get that. Or yeah, I'll send you the link later. It's also, unless you know what, because I hear you're coming to England.
Yeah, you heard through the grapevine, huh?
I heard through the only person I could have heard it from, right?
Yeah. I'm coming to Liverpool. I'm bringing my mom to Liverpool. It's just going to be that that trip and with family and just.
Are you going to get down to London?
I'm sorry.
You're going to come to London as well?
I believe I may have to stop through. I'm coming through from the States, and my mom's coming through Canada, and we're going to meet there. I think we're going to go to. I have to talk to the travel agent and find out exactly what it is, because maybe on my way back out, I could stop in London for a day.
That would be brilliant. I think it's just. Yeah. It would seem like a good thing.
It would be cool. We've never even shook hands before.
We haven't, and that seems wrong. And also, we could maybe, depending on the dates, we could maybe do a show where we're literally physically in the same place. That would be, which I did with my Ayala.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah,
that'd be amazing. All right, so now I'll make that a point of discussion. I'll let you know exactly when I'm coming in.
Okay, Silk. We'll be back next week where we will talk about some more topical boxing events. There is a world featherweight title fight taking place in Nottingham in England next week. You've got Lee Wood versus the Danger Man, Mauricio Lara. We will take a look at that situation, which will have already happened by the time we next speak in these split screens. In the meantime, thanks those of you who tuned in. As I say, we are brought to you exclusively by Ace Podcast Nation and Simon Willis, without whom we couldn't do this.
No, thank you, Simon, and thank you, Ben, for doing the book and for the conversation. It was a good time. Thank you.
One more plug: it's available on Amazon in paperback, hardcover.
TORITO.
Yeah,
there's the man.
Our formats as well. It's priced at $10.99 in the UK, which translates to about $13.50, I believe, in the United States.
Yeah, it's a steal. It's a steal. I'm going to get it.
Okay, you won't regret it.
No.
For now.